Can I just go read through the protocol for remote hearings? Only speak when invited to by the chair. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and direct all communications by the chair. For those joining remotely, please ensure your mics are muted when you're not speaking. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat function in Google Meet to alert the meeting. Please do not use the chat function for putting formal questions to the committee or to make other comments. I'll hand over to the chair.
Thank you, Rabia. Welcome everybody to our Seminar Corporate Committee, and thank you for your patience. I'd like to welcome the members in the room. We have Councillor Ali Sadek, we have Councillor Billy Lubbock, and we have Councillor Desmond. I'm the chair, which I should have started with, Councillor Potter, Rabia to my right, who's just spoken, and we've got Jerry McCarthy. And online we have Councillor Susan Fajana-Thomas, Cabinet Member for Community Safety. We've got Councillor Premru, I should be looking here, Councillor Ozen, and officers Graham Callum, Mario Hung Sang, Katie Glasgow, Stuart Thorne, John Sang, I think I'm Murray Bridgewater, and Josephine Sericardis. You're all very welcome. If I could proceed on to the next item. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Webb, Joseph, Ross, Race, Young, Norcross, Osland, and Laudette Scott.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. I think you're all we might agree that it's a bit unprecedented, the weather we've had, and I know some members have had difficulty getting in. So, is the hand raised?
Yeah, it's Liz Premru. Just to say, I don't think you mentioned Councillor Joseph, who's unwell and can't attend tonight. She did write in, but she just wanted to make sure we got the message. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Premru. So moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any interest to declare? I'll take that as a no. Item 3, can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of June 2022?
Yeah.
Great.
Agree.
Thank you. Moving on to item 4, our pay policy statement for 2023 to 24. Can I invite Stuart Thorne, who is online, to introduce the report?
Thank you very much, Councillor Potter. We are required to produce this report every year, the purpose of which is to improve transparency and accountability within local government. Hackney Council annually publishes details of its pay policy statement, and this also meets the requirement of the Localism Act 2011. For the purpose of this report, we look at the top tier of the organisation and measure it against the lowest paid employees. The top tier is the Chief Executive and Hackney Chief Officers, so those graded CO1, CO2 and CO3. The policy sets out the council's policy as it relates to remuneration of both the lowest paid employees and also the highest paid employees. The council uses 2 job evaluation schemes for that purpose, so all jobs are evaluated accordingly. The Chief Exec's pay is determined on appointment by the Appointments Committee, and just to point out that this excludes any responsibility returning officer duties that the Chief Executive has, that is paid to him separately. So Hackney publishes the ratios of the difference between the Chief Exec's pay and the lowest paid employee, and the ratio at present is currently showing 5.48, which is a slight increase from last year. We do it on pay and we do it on all earnings. I think historically there was something that altered the chief executive's pay last year, but that would have been the previous chief executive, and that has not applied this year. The figures remain the same. For this purpose, it's all the lowest graded post is posts that are spinal column point 3 and above. It is not any staff who are paid outside of that because of TUPE protection, because they don't fall under the council's normal terms and conditions and also salary scales.
Thank you,
So,
Stuart.
yeah.
Sorry. Is that the conclusion of your report?
Sorry, I was just going to say that's the conclusion of my report.
Great, thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions?
I have one. But
Councillor Billy Lummock, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, it was more on the comments from the Group Director of Finance and Corporate Resources. It says the council is facing considerable challenges. This is 4.2 on the papers with the pay deal, with the assumption of a 2% pay rise. I was just looking at the Office of National Statistics guide from June to August this year. Average regular pay growth for the private sector was 6.2% and 2.2% for the public sector. So I'm worried a little bit that we're lagging behind in the public sector and in the public sector, and what the risks are for us being so far behind in the private sector. Obviously, I know that these are issues raised, brought about primarily by national government funding. But I'm just wondering if there were any thoughts on that, as that was in that introduction.
Thank you, Stuart. Can you?
Yes, I can. I can certainly answer that. Our pay is determined by the national employer. We're part of the NJC scheme, so our pay is determined nationally. We're allowed to input into negotiations in advance of the pay. And we also express our views about levels of pay, etc. This year, you may be aware, for the first time for certainly a considerable period of time, that a flat rate award was given of 1925 with an adjustment for London weighting, which is an historical issue. Now, obviously, we have been told by the national employer that next year is also likely to be a flat rate as well. We can feed into that process, but we are bound by what the national employer says. So obviously the pay award for this year varied between 9.9% at the lowest spinal column point and 1.6% at the highest one.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Billy Lummock, do you have any follow-on questions?
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Premru.
Thanks very much. I got a couple of questions. The first was, thanks, Stuart, you just mentioned the ratios. I think you were talking about the median to the executive pay. In terms of kind of the lowest to the highest pay, I think it might, I was just wanting a bit of a steer on how Hackney feeds into and what the aspirations are for those differentials from lowest to highest. It's looking like it's knocking on towards sort of times 10. I mean, I think it's something like 871, a little bit higher than last time. And if that includes when you said the lowest pay scale, you said so. Would that include everybody on the London Living Wage?
To upwards. So it wouldn't include people who are on the London Living Wage, because they may, as I mentioned, have protection under TUPE. So, for example, this year we brought our parking contractors in on the 1st of April. So they're not included in this report, but they will be next year because we've done a restructure. So we exclude those people because they're not on our evaluated scales. So it's only scale 2. Spinal column point 3 now. So the national employer did a pay award that was a fixed amount rather than a percentage to stop that erosion. Otherwise, it was predicted by 2026 that scale 2 and scale 3 would be completely eroded.
Do you have any follow-on question, Councillor Primary?
Yeah, it was just to ask, because there are we do have contractors as well. If there was
Sorry.
a ratio for that when you kind of assess the equivalent of the London Living Wage annual salary against our top salaries. Thanks.
Contractors are excluded from this. Agency staff who are paid through our corporate agency contract are paid at the level of the rate that's equivalent to that job. So if a job is a scale 6 job, they are paid at scale 6. That's part of our contract with our agency supplier, but that's not included because they are not employees of the council.
Okay, Councillor Primary.
Thank you. And I wondered, were there additional questions on? Can we ask additional questions on the whole pay, or are we going through area by area?
What? Anything specific?
Yeah, it was just a question around the terms and conditions of redundancy, about council staff not returning after redundancy, and how that fits with specifically with the proposals for the reductions in library staff, where it said that the proposals for redundancy doesn't exclude people from coming back to, I think it's a band 3 relief staff. Thanks.
I can answer some of it. The library's restructure, they have agreed that if staff wish to continue being on a casual rota, they could do that, and that wouldn't affect any redundancy payments. Normally, when someone leaves a local authority, they cannot return for a period of 31 days. If it's under a voluntary redundancy scheme, then there is an additional restriction that they can't return for a period of a year.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Coming back to the ratios between the chief executive's pay and the lowest paid, and also the median as well. Obviously, the difference between 2021 and 21-22 is a slight increase in ratio. Yeah. It's quite hard to judge just from those figures what kind of trajectory, or is that difference getting slowly wider, or are we bringing that together? Is it possible to, in the future, or maybe as a follow-up to this meeting, to have figures over a period of years so we can get the impression of the trend? And the other thing, I think we've asked this before from you, to see whether it's also possible to have information about the pay of other local authorities in terms of the chief executive post, for comparison purposes, particularly the London boroughs, and particular other London boroughs that are similar kind of, demographics to us.
In relation to previous years, I can get that done, whether you'd like it as a further report or whether you'd like it in the future. In relation to the chief executive's pay, this was reviewed when Tim Shields resigned, and I did a piece of work with the mayor where we looked at comparison boroughs and their rate of pay, and ours was in the middle of London boroughs that were considered to be similar to us. It's quite complicated because there's some boroughs that have shared service arrangements, tri-boroughs and things like that. So their pay is obviously higher and they're not comparable. And there's some outer London boroughs that have very little services in-house at all. So that was not really comparable. But
it possible?
I did that piece of work with the mayor. I don't know if that can be shared, but I'll happily find out.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Are there any other questions, members?
Did you want to say something, Jerry? No,
This isn't Jerry's item.
I didn't think so.
Okay, all right, members, the committee is recommended to agree the pay policy and recommend the council approve it. Does the
Agree.
committee agree?
Agree.
That's carried. Thank you, members.
Thank you. I'll leave the meeting now, Councillor Potter.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for your attendance, Stuart.
Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. And to you.
Josephine.
Hello, sorry, just to check, I believe that the recommendation isn't to just agree, but to go to refer it to full council,
Yes.
only because that wasn't necessarily stated.
Yeah. So
I didn't quite catch that. What?
So it's, yeah, I mean, yes, it was recommended to go to council. That's what, yeah.
Oh no, it was just in case someone said anything. Just making sure it was stated. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Josephine. It's a little hard to hear you, so yeah. Thank you. So moving on to item 5, the Planning Service Authority Monitoring Report for April 2020 to March 2021. I mean, this has been delayed slightly because of issues to do with the cyber attack. Can I invite Kun Sang to introduce the report, please?
Well, good evening, Chair. I'm actually going to introduce the report. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Glasgow. I'm the Strategic Planning Manager. Hi. So the report we're presenting tonight is the Authority Monitoring Report. It's an annual report produced by the Planning Service, which provides monitoring information on planning-related activities and planning decisions over that reporting year, and it helps inform policy development. So the report presented covers the period from the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. It's a very detailed and comprehensive report, and it covers a broad range of planning aspects. So I've prepared some slides tonight just to take you through the key headlines. So just bear with me, I'm going to present my screen. Can you see that, Chair?
Yes.
Loading. Oh, sorry, I'm not meaning to. It demonstrates both the importance and effects to note up front that this year's AMR is limited. The data presented in the report is verified once the data is retrieved. The total of just over 1,000. Is increasing as a proportion and in absolute terms, and in 2021 the results for both the numbers and the proportion of social rented homes completed is the highest in recent years. So it's very positive. And then just to note, the housing delivery test is the government's housing delivery test, which measures whether the government's housing targets have been met over the last 3 years. So we had a positive result in the sense that in the Borough of Hackney, 96% of that target was met. We had some data on housing approvals with regards to major development, and this is showing that in that reporting year, the proportion of affordable housing units permitted was 45%. So this graph shows the breakdown. So in terms of where that housing was delivered, so this is a breakdown by area. And as you can see, the housing has been delivered across the borough, but growth has been focused in Woodbury Down, Manor House, Shoreditch and Hoxton, and these are key growth areas identified in our local plan. Just a snapshot of housing completions on small sites. The proportion completed or built in the reporting year was nearly 14%. Looking at the trend analysis, it shows that it varies over the 5 years. But just important to note that small sites make a very valuable contribution towards housing delivery in the borough. Since we introduced our local plan policy on small sites, which requires all developments, so those under 10 units to deliver affordable housing, we've secured approximately 350,000 contribution towards affordable housing. And just to note there, in terms of the amount collected in terms of Section 106 in the reporting year was 6.37 million towards affordable housing. Some key findings on employment in town centres. So in the reporting year, and that's an increase in the previous year. And then also in 2020, there were over 23,000 enterprises in the borough. So that's an increase from the 2019 reporting year. In terms of retail, around 7,500 square metres of new retail completed. And the survey results indicates that the town centres are performing well in terms of vibrancy and vacancy rate. So you can see, sorry, the vacancy rates are below or in line with national averages. I think I've touched on this in previous slides. This is just showing you the amount of affordable workspace secured over reporting years. So you can see the general trend is that's increasing. Just touching on key findings for kind of communities, culture, education, open space. Good news, the number of parks awarded green flag status increased from the previous year. Planning obligations have been used to allocate and deliver a number of improvements on open spaces. So there's a list there of the relevant open spaces. They kind of vary in location, some sort of Shoreditch Way, I think there's one Hackney Wick and also Hackney Central. The Child Friendly Places SPD, which we adopted in 2021, money spent, the 4.6 one of Section 106 monies, but that's gone towards improvements in libraries, schools, community facilities, public realm, open space. And just touching on, 2 schools completed in 2020, and there's the details there of where they were located. Design and heritage, situation with design and heritage in Hackney has been positive. Number of listed buildings at risk has decreased to 29 from 33 on the 2020 register. The Hackney Design Awards, which we hold biannually, the number of nominations received increased from the previous year. And also in that reporting year, we introduced a new award, which was the Young People's Award. And that was really to complement the work undertaken on the Child Friendly Places SPD. And finally, Council designated 3 new conservation areas. Just a snapshot of transport headlines. I think just important to note that because of the lag in data collection for transport, nearly all the figures predate the outbreak, the outbreak of the pandemic. But just to give you a snapshot of some of those key findings, the demand survey identified 42.8% of people in Hackney use walking as their main mode of transport. And this is compared to the Greater London average of 38%. Hackney school streets and low traffic neighbourhood programs resulted in 19 new LTNs and over 40 school streets around most of the borough's primary schools, as well as the creation of 2 new protected cycle routes. And then finally, just to say the planning policies have facilitated the delivery of car-free development through the borough, and there has been a steady increase in car-free developments in the borough, with 31 car-free obligations agreed as compared to 2020 in the previous reporting year. So just on planning performance, in terms of the planning performance in the reporting year, so we exceeded the national and local targets for major, minor and other allocations. You can see set out in the table. And just to point out, I think it was as you can see, sort of the appeals dismissed was the only indicator that we didn't exceed our internal targets on. And there are reasons for that. The performance for the year should be taken with caution when compared to previous years. The impact of COVID and lockdown plus the cyber attack has meant that just 26 appeals were decided. And this is compared to, for example, 224 appeal decisions in the previous reporting year. So there are key considerations to take into account in terms of those stats. And then, sorry, just finally, this table showing the headline figures for Section 106 and SIL, contributions received, spent and agreed. So you can see some of those headline figures there. For Section 106, amount agreed was 17 million, over 11 million received and just over 5.6 million spent. And then with SIL, we've collected nearly 4 million in the reporting year. So that concludes the report. I'll hand back over to the chair for questions. Just to say, I'm joined by some officers, some colleagues in the service and also Street Scene. So I may bring them in. They've contributed to the report, so you may bring them in depending on the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was a very detailed report. Okay, members, we've got a question. Councillor Desmond.
Good evening, Katie. Nice to see you from afar, and I hope you're enjoying this mild weather. I've got a few questions. Firstly, as you know, the council and other local authorities offer a pre-app consultation to potential applicants to give them ideas of what the council is likely to think about a potential project. Do we know approximately how many people took advantage of this and how many pre-app consultations took place? That's the first one. The second, there's a particular applicant, I obviously won't give the specific details, but it's on an estate, the Landfield estate, who put in for an extension of his house, and along the terrace in which he lives, there were similar extensions, and yet his extension was refused, making it difficult for him with an expanding family. Are we still taking account of similar development, immediate vicinity, and does that augment our planning decision? And finally, I'm very pleased we're getting all this money in, but it's a large sum of money unspent, over £7 million in the particular financial year we're referring to was not spent. Where are we keeping this money? Are we gaining interest on it? And is it intended this will be spent during the next financial year?
Hi, Councillor. I'll take the first two questions relating to planning applications and pre-apps. So in terms of taking into account similar planning permissions or similar examples within the vicinity of an application site, that is a material planning consideration. However, that is just one of the considerations. All planning applications are treated on their merits, assessed against policies and relevant guidelines. And there may be circumstances in which an application, a proposal may be similar to a neighbouring extension, but if the recommendation or decision is different, then we would have to take a different view. So what may appear to be an identical or similar application, there may be other considerations to take. Happy for you to send me that particular example and I can look into it and provide more information if required. In terms of pre-applications, don't have the precise number, and in fact this is one of the things that we're looking to improve our monitoring on. We're restructuring the service area so that we have better monitoring of pre-apps amongst other performance stats, but we highly encourage applicants, residents and businesses to go through the pre-app process to ensure greater certainty of a successful subsequent planning application. And it also benefits officers as well, because it provides officers the opportunity to see a proposal in its infancy and allow for us to make a more detailed and quicker decision ultimately when the application is submitted.
Great. And what about the money? Our third question.
I'll hand over to Murray to answer that, Councillor.
I can take that question. So data relating to Section 106 and SIL, it's been taken from our infrastructure funding statement, which is a annual legislative requirement, and each year we have to present what we've collected, allocated, spent and retained. So as you said, the unspent figure is very much that. So in the reporting year we allocated monies to a range of projects, and these are appendixed in the funding statement, which is hyperlinked to the top of the slide. So obviously we did allocate like a lot of the money that was received. It's just due to longer term nature of the projects, some are spent on the capital programme, that they're not all spent within the reporting year.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Vinnie Lubbock.
I've got quite a few, but I suppose because there's a few absences, that'd be all right, won't it?
Do you want to do two and then we'll go to Councillor Clemmer and then come back to yourself, if that's okay?
At point 1.3, what happens if someone claims they received a planning approval during the 4 months that hasn't been recovered from our planning, from the cyber attack, from that data? And then I wanted to ask on page 27, is the section 106 increase due to more developments being delivered, or are these increases sort of determined by a particular formula or negotiation process that has yielded more return?
Thanks, Councillor. I can take the first question regarding the planning applications and any decisions made during the cyber attack. Those decisions are automatically logged on our planning register. It was the main concerns and main issues surrounded the applications that were still live within the system. So we do have records of determined applications.
Great.
And the SIL question?
I'm just
So section 106.
Section 106, sorry.
I'm just trying to locate the figure on the report. Sorry,
Which page?
So it was page 27, I believe. Flicking between digital and not. Yeah, so just about the increase of sales. So I think it's 4.6? Maybe, yeah, might be in a separate section, or might be in the actual.
You're talking about the 6.37 million, which was collected through section 106 for affordable housing. Is that
Yeah,
right?
just what accounts for the increase of the of section 106 income.
I can take this one. So the variance in both SIL and section 106 depends very much on the developments that have been implemented, basically. So you know, there might be a scheme that has a sort of, you know, £5 million affordable housing section 106 contribution, which would be sort of fairly out of the ordinary as a sort of single figure. And then if that implements in the reporting year, then obviously that's going to have quite a big impact on the figure that's reported, basically. And the same thing with SIL, you know, sort of big development that implement during the year will have an effect on the sort of overall SIL. So yeah, that would explain why you get variances from year to year. It's sort of not necessarily representative of trend, really. Hopefully
Okay, so it's about when the money comes in rather than about how it's negotiated, which is probably more of a standardized process.
But it would be the same thing on the negotiations. So it's the same thing on the decision making side. So, you know, sort of some schemes during any given year will have bigger contributions than others, both in terms of section 106 and SIL.
Okay.
This is sort of, basically it's a fairly small sample size with quite big variances in figures, just depending on the specifics of the development proposal.
Is there much variability in what can be negotiated?
Yes, basically. So, for example, on an affordable housing contribution, a scheme that's delivering all of its affordable housing on site isn't going to have a affordable housing contribution, but a scheme that doesn't, for one reason or another, which will be down to the sort of specifics of the development and the negotiation on it, might have a contribution instead. So sort of two schemes, you know, one scheme of 100 units might provide all of its affordable housing on site and there'd be sort of zero financial contribution, and another one might be delivering as an off-site contribution and might have that £5 million contribution, sort of hypothetically. So yeah, there can be sort of big variances from scheme to scheme. It's not simply the scale of the development.
Okay, if you can hold those questions, they'll be very welcome shortly. Councillor Premroe, if you'd like to raise. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks very much for the reports, and excuse me, my throat's not right. So just relating to Councillor Desmond's question and the answer around planning, it was just a question on when you're talking about the very specific things in planning that might be different from, you know, a similar request. Is that now including looking at the potential for green roofs and solar, so that we're not looking at some places being overshadowed, which might have that capacity? My second question is for Katie around the 45% affordable housing, just to ask what percentage of that is the social rent housing, if there's a figure for that. And the other question for Katie was around the green park status, I think, and what do we need to do to bring up the other parks to be green flag status too. Thanks.
I'll take the first one, Councillor. So in terms of overshadowing, loss of light, sense of enclosure, that is a material planning consideration, but primarily in terms of its impact on occupiers' amenity. We can consider other aspects of overshadowing, but our primary concern would be the impact on individuals, families, and occupants themselves.
I'm just going to. Oh, thanks, John. I'm just going to check and refer to. Oh, Kyung might have the answer. I was just going to see whether we had that in the report, or if not, with something we can definitely provide. Just with the green flag status, I'd need to refer to my colleagues in Parks Department on that to advise. But yeah, happy to kind of report back to you on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Yeah, Councillor, for the 445 affordable housing, we've got 217 down as social housing, according to the permissions that were granted. So that is, or five, that is about 48% of the affordable housing will be social rented.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, any follow-on questions, Councillor Premry?
That's fine. Thank you, Claire.
Great. Okay, Councillor. Oh, do you mind if I go to Councillor Sidek first, and then we'll definitely.
I'm happy to go after.
No.
Sure. One of them was sort of a follow-up to Councillor Binny Lovett's question on 1.3, but a slightly different approach. On the missing data, I just wondered what the impact of that is likely to be on the figures that are shown throughout the report. So, for example, the figures on the proportion of new housing that's social rent or affordable. If there's a sort of period of time where we lack the planning data for that, how credible are the figures that we're relying on here? And is there a process in place to revise the figures and update them subsequently once that information becomes accessible, if that's the plan?
Graham, are you wanting to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer it in terms of the figures on affordable housing and the information on major applications, in so much as we know that there's no missing data on major applications, which is what's driving those affordable housing deliveries and the affordable housing consents information. I don't know if John or Katie might have something to add on other decisions, but yeah, for major applications, we know there's no missing data.
Yeah. I think in terms of the impact, I think it's difficult to know. I think obviously we're doing everything we can to retrieve that data, and I think that's why it's important we kind of flag that, you know, we will kind of verify once we are able to retrieve that data. We'll be looking to verify the data presented in this report, and we can do that through the next AMR, because we can report on previous, you know, we can show the results for the previous reporting years. But we felt it was important to kind of bring a report at this point in time, because it does provide a number of very helpful updates on a broad range of issues. But that, yeah, it is noted, and that's why we flagged it as you know, there is that kind of missing data, and once we do retrieve that, we will verify it in the next AMR.
Yeah, so Councillor, yeah, I just want to reiterate what Graham and Katie have said in terms of for major sites. We've got all the details and the applications, and just to emphasise, you know, although not lot and low, the actual amount that small sites, those are under 10 units or less, that actually their contribution to overall housing delivery is about 13%, 13.6% last year, and on average it's 20%. So it's a significant proportion, but not overwhelming. But once we get all the data we can revise, we'll look at those figures again.
Thank you, Gold. Okay, Councillor Sidek, did you have a follow-on question? Or
Well, I've got a couple more, but I'm happy to.
Okay.
All right. In the
one more, and then I'll
one more,
on
and
to
then,
Councillor
yeah, sure.
Binny Lovett.
In the employment section on page 27, paragraph 4.10, there are references to Hackney gaining additional, you know, almost 6,500 active enterprises throughout the relevant time period, and that's increasing the demand for commercial floor space. I just wondered if anyone had any sense of how many of those new businesses were small businesses or self-employed people working from home rather than requiring commercial real estate.
Councillor, that data we acquired from a third source, so it's like open source data that we acquired that
Right,
information from. We haven't analysed that level of detail. It's just showing a trend that the Hackney's businesses or enterprises is increasing, and so it's still buoyant rather than a detailed analysis of that demand, as it were.
sure.
But okay.
I suppose a related follow-up question then is just in the, and this is probably in here somewhere, so forgive me for not spotting it if it is. Has that general upsurge in the number of businesses establishing themselves within the borough, has that led to an uptick in the demand for commercial real estate? And is that a sort of consistent trend in the borough? Because that's obviously a positive story if that's the case.
It's not something that we'll report in the AMR, because this is really about our planning performance. So, in terms of decisions made, floor space and homes delivered, etc. So, sorry, Katie.
Young. I mean, I think one important stat to raise though is, and then we do touch on, is the vacancy rates in the town centres. So it gives you an indication that the town centres in particular are performing well. They are vibrant, and our vacancy rates look very well compared to kind of the London. So yeah, I guess in terms of demand in town centres, that's a good indicator of having lower vacancy rates.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, Councillor Vinnie Lummock, go ahead.
Yeah, so my next question was following up a little bit on Councillor Premru's question about affordable housing. Just in terms of definition, something would be useful is how does intermediate get counted as affordable? So it's just a sense of what's affordable, what's genuinely affordable, and it feels like in terms of the delivery in the period covered by the table 5.2 on page 64, it's still quite a low percentage. It's if you exclude intermediate, it's 6%, or if you include intermediate, it's 16%. And then if you look at the last year, it's 21.2%. I'm just wondering how that compares to sort of what we're aiming for, or during that period. How does that compare to what was actually approved by planning?
Who would like to take that?
I can try and take that, Councillor. I mean, our implementation rate, the implementation is beyond the control of the local authority, which is why it's quite well. It's 20%. It's an improvement as opposed to our approval rate. I think we've all seen the stories about people not implementing the permissions or the land banking. So we are looking at ways of getting the implementation rate higher. I think it's about 80% in Hackney of our planning permission. And regarding intermediate housing, that is 80%, I believe. We do have a definition in the local plan, but it's 80% of the average rent in the borough, isn't up to 80% of the rent in the borough, which we call intermediate housing. And shared ownership obviously is considered is classified as is classified as intermediate housing and is considered an affordable form of housing.
Okay, I have two separate questions very quickly on one, which I think might just be a quick typo. One is, who judges when no affordable housing could be viably delivered? I assume that's primarily something that's pitched by developers, and they say that this is not, a viable situation. But kind of within the council and the planning, how does that decision get made, whether or not that's viable or not? And my second question is another separate one on page 88, 9.4. Is it possible to differentiate between car and motorcycles in terms of the use of transport in the borough, because obviously powered two-wheelers would be quite different in terms of infrastructure planning implications.
Graham, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, thanks, councillors. I can take the first part about how we assess viability. So applications that are providing less than 50% of affordable housing on site that isn't in accordance with our tenure mix policy expectations need to support those applications with financial viability assessments. There's guidance in the NPPF and through the London Plan on the kind of form and content of those appraisals. Planning officers have a sort of good working knowledge of how those appraisals work and will be very involved in the assessment of them and will provide a lot of local knowledge input on some of the assumptions around values in particular and comparables and costs associated with the development, such as SIL, etc. But those reports will be reviewed on our behalf by RICS accredited development surveyors. We have an in-house surveyor who looks at the majority of them. Sometimes we will procure that work out at the developer's expense, but our discretion of who does it. Sometimes major applications can take quite a long time to be determined, and the large part of that period is normally ongoing negotiation about the affordable housing levels within proposals. And it's basically because of the extent of scrutiny that we apply to that financial viability assessment. On the biggest schemes, the GLA will also, when they're a consultee on the applications, they will also use their in-house surveyors to review it as well. So it's sort of a second pair of eyes on the biggest schemes. So yeah, lots and lots of scrutiny goes into assessing the proposed levels of affordable housing. And I think it's sort of a pretty good track record of increasing levels of affordable housing or increasing off-site contributions in some cases on schemes as a result of our review of applications.
Could I just quickly follow up on that? Over what sort of period do they have to suggest that it's viable or not viable? Because over a longer period, if they're actually doing the lettings, then that could make it more viable. And with the increasing costs of building, etc., does that not mean that this is potentially a sort of a get out of jail free card for future developments?
So most of them are done on a sales basis, and it's a snapshot in time, and that's in accordance with all the guidance on it. So it's sort of the viability picture at the time the application is made. Occasionally, where it's a kind of clear rental model of development, it will use a yield-based model, which gets more complicated, and then we definitely need a lot more input from our development surveyors on that type. Once the level's agreed, then that's agreed through the planning permission. It needs to be delivered. So in terms of rising costs, if development costs are rising at the moment, as they are at the moment, faster than sales values, then it means that it's probably a better picture for us in terms of schemes being delivered than if the affordable housing contribution or provision was negotiated at the time of implementation. But it's not. We use clawback mechanisms, which are clauses in Section 106 that allow for an assessment either after a period of time has elapsed without implementation or after a period of time from implementation if it's kind of not properly implemented, which allows us to claw back any uplift in development value as affordable housing contribution. So there's kind of there's a catch situation for us, but it doesn't work in reverse. It doesn't allow under delivery of affordable housing.
But people could apply for a variation if the viability assessment changes, correct?
They can apply for a deed of variation. We've got no obligation whatsoever to accept it. Well, I don't think we've ever seen one in Hackney that looks to reduce the.
I think we have one in Hackney Downs with the Kids Mania development. They apply for a variation based on that viability.
It's not one that I'm familiar with. It's certainly not a common situation.
Okay. And yeah, the other question was about cars and motorcycles being differentiated in our sort of assessment, but that might just be the data that you get. I just wanted just to flag up on page 77, I think there was a typo about the number of businesses launched. I think that is the total number of businesses, whereas it's talking about the number of businesses launched a bit later, so I might just want to change that.
Thanks, Councillor. We'll, I think we'll need to get back to you on that point around the transport, just because, yeah, we retrieved that data from the London Travel Demand Survey, so we'll just look it up to see whether that's something that can be distinguished, differentiated.
And I thought, yeah, the typo was on 6.17, just that first line. It says,
okay, thank you.
23,270 new businesses launched, which is probably a bit high.
Seems odd, but it says also 21,300 previously, so we need clarification.
Is that how many are in? Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
Can we have clarification on those stats then, if it's not evident now in terms of what? Yeah, lovely.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. I noticed Councillor Sadek, actually, he had a couple of additional questions, didn't he? Let's see if he comes back in shortly. Maybe I could just ask the question now. So it sounds like, you know, lots of great stories in terms of what's been going on in Hackney. I noticed in the report you also talk about 2020 to 21 was the highest number of social rent in recent years. So I wondered whether you just want to talk a little bit, Matt. I know we've talked a lot about the current figures, about the projections going forward. I noticed you've got some detail on page 72 about, you know, the projection over the next few years. But I just wondered whether you'd have any comments on affordable housing and social rent as part of that. And also I wondered whether you thought perhaps we might have any issues going forward in terms of some of these applications actually being built because of the difficult issue with rising construction costs.
I mean, I can take on the first part of the question, Councillor, about recent years. In the main report at table 5.1, we sort of we do 5-year project, the 5-year delivery from financial year 2016 to this year, and you can see the numbers there of how we've achieved in terms of social rent and intermediate. I mean, last year I think it made a few headlines that we only got a net delivery in social rent of 1. This year we've gone up to 128. That's in terms of social rent, so that's the best we've achieved for the last 5 years. And the main, not the main victim, but in terms of intermediate, we had a high in financial year 2016, and that's slowly going down to 67 units. So that's what we mean by, you know, the affordable housing as an overall proportion is going up recently, and the social rented element of the affordable housing is also increasing.
Great news.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Regarding the second question about implementation, I don't know whether Kate, one of my colleagues could go into a bit more detail about, you know, from planning permission to implementation.
I mean, I noticed you've got a slight decrease, a very slight decrease in the number of buildings built, and I wondered whether you were taking that factor into account or whether it's just too difficult for you to project on that kind of basis. Katie, were you going to comment on that?
Sorry, can I just clarify the question again? Sorry, just in terms
so
of
I was just wondering, in terms of the, you know, the housing supply projection over the next few years, whether you thought possible issues to do with rising construction costs might change the picture slightly.
Yeah, I mean, it may do. I think something which may impact on the supply is potentially COVID and the pandemic, and what the impacts of that has been in terms of both delivery, but also kind of the number of planning applications coming forward. And I'm not sure whether colleagues in Graham or John have anything to add that in terms of what they've seen in terms of the planning application side of things. But I mean, I think probably it's helpful just to highlight, I guess, the importance of the planning policy framework and the local plan, and having that in place in an up-to-date framework, which really does set out that growth strategy and identifies these key areas where we do want to direct growth, and importantly, a number of sites, so allocate sites where we can deliver growth going forward. And so there's the role of the council in terms of producing that framework. There's the role of the council in terms of its own role in terms of as a council house builder. There was lots of good news stories that went to Cabinet last night, a number of papers taken to Cabinet and setting out what the council is going to be doing in terms of facilitating housing and also delivering housing over the next few years. So certainly as a council, I think we're working hard to do what we can to help promote and stimulate growth in the borough. As you say, there's work we do in terms of the policy framework and the planning decisions and determining planning applications, but then it is often down to the private sector, housing associations to then deliver that. And there are a range of challenges which can affect implementation, and rising construction costs could be one of those.
Thank you, Katie. I'll come back to just check with Councillor Sedek. Did you have additional questions? And then I'll come on to Councillor Premru, and then we'll kind of wrap up this item, I think.
I did have another question, but I think on reflection and noting the answer that I got to the previous one, it's probably not suitable to ask it.
Thank you. Councillor Premru.
Thank you,
Floor
Chair.
is yours.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so it was a question about the rising number of hotel and hostel accommodation from 2015, 866, I think it said, new rooms, and then this 2021, 270 new rooms. And I was just wondering if this is an upward trend, if you could comment a little bit more about that, maybe say what's the difference between the hotel and the hostel rooms in terms of if it's the hospitality aspect, is that seen as a kind of increased benefit to economy, and is there also an impact on land use for housing if that is an upward trend? And then a second question, is there any data in Hackney around rising numbers of Airbnbs, by which I don't mean kind of people like letting a room, but where properties are used sort of solely as Airbnbs, which might impact on either the cost of rent or the availability of occupancy for permanent housing? Thanks.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, I'll try to answer the questions. The Airbnb issue, we know it's we haven't got the stats locally at the moment. We know it's a London-wide issue, and I think London councils are raising it, and we're involved in that element. So it is on our radar of all London boroughs, and I think major cities, of the issue of Airbnb. So it's something that when we review what we're going to monitor in future years, it's something that's there. Now the hotel element, let's say 270 hotels. We have the details of the hotels where those 200 additional rooms were actually delivered. I think it was from two new schemes, an extension to an existing hotel. I mean, the hotel schemes were, well, the application date from 2015 and 2017, but they were only delivered or completed financial year 2020. So we can give you those details. Difference between the hotel and hostel is quite difficult, but we know definitely from this year, the hostel that we have recorded is at 420 to 427 Seven Sisters Road, which is the big hotel at the junction, the Manor House Junction. There is a part of that is I think for a new hotel. I can't remember. I think it's Trust House 40 or something like that. It's one of those. But next door is a hostel, specifically catering for or those in need and vulnerable. So that's why we made that distinction between those two and recorded those as separate, even though they were same application. So you had another question, Councillor, or you had another part of that question?
I think it was just to see, this sounds like that was an extension, but if there are increasing hotel rooms and hospitality in Hackney, if that has an impact on the potential for the land use for house building.
Yeah. Well, yes, there is always that issue, and which is why in our policy in the policy document we do advocate conventional self-contained housing as the priority. Obviously, if someone puts an application in for a hotel, we have to determine it on that basis.
Thank you. Okay. Katie or Graham, I noticed you had your hands put them down. Did you want to add anything?
No, thanks. I think Kieran covered the point I was going to make. Thanks, Kieran.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of this item. I think there's lots of really good news from Hackney's Planning Authority in terms of the increase in affordable housing and also affordable work space. There's lots of really good stuff going on in the borough. There's also, I noticed in the document that you've got supplementary planning documents there's quite a bit of work coming back to the cabinet in early 2023. I think we'll be particularly keen to look at the one on sustainability alongside the many others. So I'd just like to thank you for your work and thank you for your attendance tonight. But before you go, I just want to speak to the committee. So the committee is recommended to approve the authority monitoring report.
Agreed.
The report is approved. Thank you very much for your time. You're welcome to stay, officers, but if you'd like to go.
Compliments of the season.
Compliments of the season. And we look forward to your next monitoring report. Can I just ask before you go, I mean, I know this one was slightly delayed. I'm presuming the next one is going to be, we won't have to wait a year. Any idea of schedule when the next one is going to come to talk to the committee?
Yeah, ideally what we'd like to do is bring something through in kind of the spring, but it is really dependent on when we can get these data issues resolved. We're working really hard with with various kind of organisations to get that sorted. It may be that it might have to be mid-year in June, but yeah, with any luck, hopefully sort of March.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's hope we see you then or shortly after. Anyway,
great.
Enjoy
Thank you
the
very
rest
much,
of your evening. Thank you, officers. Okay, we can now move on to our final substantive item of the evening, the Regulatory Services Service Plan Update 21-22. Can I invite Jerry McCarthy, who's been sitting here patiently, to introduce the report? And I also welcome Councillor Fiona Thomas, who's online, who may wish to speak as well. Over to Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. I hope the members have had an opportunity to read this. I'm not going to go through it in detail, so I'll just bring out some highlights in the report, and then I'll happily take any questions on any aspect of it, because it's quite a long report. It's nearly 40 pages long. So, to introduce this report, the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan for 22-23 was approved by Corporate Committee in June 2022, and this report provides an update on the performance of the Environmental Health Service against the plan for 2022-23 to the end of quarter 2, which is the end of September. It also demonstrates the impact of the service in managing services post-COVID and the challenges faced, and also the greater emphasis placed in driving up compliance through advice, education, inspections, and the necessary interventions undertaken. It also reflects on the service at the end of the previous financial year, 21-22, and it also highlights the work of the trading standards team for 22-23 again to the end of quarter 2. On page 100 of the report, just wants to point out that the actual Food Law Enforcement Service Plan is actually a statutory plan. It sets out how the Council will undertake enforcement of food safety legislation. On page 101, paragraph 4.7, just highlight that the Food Standards Agency obtained government permission to temporarily deviate from the inspection program to suspend all routine inspections, and inspections are done on a priority basis, high, medium, low. Also, in the previous financial year, just wants to highlight officers undertook 1,229 inspections compared to the 147 allocated. This is due to concentrating on a backlog of unrated businesses, which are members' information of our businesses that have applied to operate as a food business which haven't received an inspection, and also the completion of the food hygiene rating system re-inspections, which is really important to the council, because if a business wants to trade on a delivery platform, it needs to have a rating, minimum rating of 3 or above to get on it. So the likes of Uber Eats, Deliveroo will not accept a business unless it has a food hygiene rating of 3 or above to be put on the platform. And it's really important for businesses that we deal with that as quickly as we can, especially Hackney has a very high percentage of small businesses rather than sort of chains. So that's something we've done as well. On note to paragraph 4.11, that table 1 just shows the performance of the last financial year. There's nothing in particular I wanted to highlight in that. It's for information, just shows the visits and the premises, what officers have done, and the number ceased trading, information on what officers have undertaken. I just want to highlight paragraph 4.12 on page 103, which refers to health and safety, and that the work we've done in relation to that has been disrupted, first due to the COVID pandemic, and as a result of that, we set up a COVID response team, which took away resources from health and safety enforcement, and also we had the cyber attack, which affected that in October 2020. And I just refer you to paragraph 4.13 on page 104, which relates to trading standards, which in the last financial year, the team focuses on highest risk premises and get categorized as upper and medium inspections. There's an explanation of what they are in table 3.0 on the same page. For example, high risk is premises that might be selling knives, for example, of products that are subject to safety legislation. So that's an example of that. And you will see in that paragraph, that table 3.0, that the last financial year trading standards undertook all the inspections that they were required to do. They've actually overachieved on inspections for that year. Paragraph 4.14 is about the food hygiene inspection program, and premises are rated A to E. That's all done on a risk basis. So while our category A premises could be a manufacturing premises or an approved premises, which would be something like a sandwich maker or somebody selling to the catering business, you could have a small cafe which could be category A due to the risk it poses, because as you will be aware that businesses like, say, Chain First, I'll use Costa as an example, they will have people who will be able to provide records on pest control, they'll have a food hygiene management system, they'll be able to show training records, all that type of information, whereas a small business may not necessarily be able to do that, and will unfortunately end up with higher risk rating for that reason. In terms of inspections carried out to the end of quarter 2, 459 inspections were carried out, and the categories that are broken down are provided there. And again, table 4.0 on paragraph on 4.16 on page 106, that shows a breakdown of the number of inspections carried out, A's and B's.
and what everything else has been done. We have improved that table since, because since then we've actually been able to show the number of inspections we've done on the alternative enforcement system. So, and I'll come to that. The one thing I want to highlight on that is the percentage of premises are broadly compliant. And broadly compliant premises are those which will get a food hygiene rating of 3 or above. Due to the cyber attack, we haven't been able to accurately calculate that. So we're reliant on the information held in the Food Standards Agency database. But we know that if we take our own figures into account, that figure is actually 96% as opposed to 74%. And there's an explanation at the bottom of the table 4.0 for that. I want to refer you then to chart 1.0 on overdue inspections, which is the historical category inspections. And that figure at the beginning of the year started off as over 800. And when the report was written, it was down to 500. And I can let you know that the last update, as of the end of November, that figure is now 400. So we are reducing that month by month by month. And that's been dealt with by 2 dedicated officers on a part-time basis. I've already referred to the food hygiene rating system. Again, ideally, we would like everyone to have a rating of 4 or 5. That's not going to be possible. But obviously, what we encourage businesses rating 0 to 2 to apply for a re-rating inspection once they've undertaken the initial improvements highlighted. And the number of premises with a rating of 3 remains high. Also, we offer a paid re-inspection services for those businesses who want to achieve a better rating. The fee for that is currently £175. It will go up in the next financial year. The other bit I wanted to highlight was paragraph 4.26, page 108, to show that we don't actually have any businesses with a food hygiene rating of 0, which is really good news. And table 6 does a comparison of Hackney compared to London and nationally with our ratings. And obviously, we may have less 5s than London or nationally, but our percentage of 3s and 4s is significantly high. If you will see the national figure is 6.4%, ours is 15%. So the majority of our premises can actually get onto delivery platforms, which is good for them. We've undertaken inspections in relation to food standards, and that's shown as paragraphs 4.27 to 4.28. Then table 7 at the bottom of page 109 shows the enforcement action broken down. And I just wanted to highlight paragraph 4.31 is that we may use any enforcement powers we have, including formal enforcement notices in terms of health and safety to improve health and safety risk. But we always undertake a graduated enforcement, except where we see something that's an immediate risk, where we can close premises if there is that. And obviously we have an enforcement policy which was approved by Cabinet January 2019. And we also take account of the regulations code and the enforcement code that's when we're undertaking any enforcement. So we just don't go in and take action without thinking of the consequences. Everything is done, and there's a rationale for everything we do. On page 111, that's a review of what we did for COVID-19. I'm not going to refer to that. And take you then to page 113, which in relation to trading standards. And again, you see the inspections, page 112, sorry, undertaken in 2021 and 21-22. And again, they have achieved all their inspections, which is really, really good news. And obviously, they focus on risk-based inspections as well as carrying out intelligence-led projects. So anything we do either is risk-based or does an intelligence. We've got intelligence at a risk issue. And the intelligence could come from a member of the public, the police, it could come from anyone. So, and obviously they also deal with consumer complaints as well. And on page 114, the Office of Trading Standards undertake weights and measures inspections. So they test spirit measures to make sure they're compliant, something they do, which is increased this time of the year. They do a lot of work on counterfeit goods. They undertake a lot of test purchases as well. And between April and September this year, they've undertaken 5 test purchase operations in conjunction with the police and the police cadets. And they arrange some alcohol, knives, tobacco, vaping goods, and the sale of a vape to minors. We also deregulate animal feed to make sure that doesn't get contaminated. They also undertake tobacco enforcement work that's highlighted on page 115, along with the work they've done for London Trading Standards Week. They also undertake illegal alcohol enforcement, nicotine products, and this was the good, and I've explained in paragraph 4.70 about candid oil, which obviously is of concern. But obviously at the moment there is no strict laws on that at the moment to require UK managers to have proper labelling in respect of that. And the other thing which trading standards do, they undertake proceeds of crime investigations. So if somebody's investigating somebody, for example, if that would be somebody who would let out flax without planning permission, there's a financial gain to be got for that. And we've got currently 2 cases under investigation, which are public benefit of 247,000. If they're successful in court, of which the council will get 37% of that, the rest goes to the Home Office and other agencies. And I just highlight again on page 180 is Trading Standards have an income and impacts outputs framework, which shows a lot of the work they've done. So you'll see that as well. And I think that's it in a nutshell, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Full comprehensive report as always, and great news to hear that you'll be able to catch up on those visits to food premises, which I know was difficult during the pandemic. Any questions, members?
Have a couple.
Yeah.
So
Go for it, Councillor Benedict.
really good report, and I spoke to a restaurant owner who was really impressed by the inspection service. So thank you for providing the information about that here. On point 4.65, talking about lettings agents who are non-compliant, is that primarily around legal fees that they might be illegal fees that they might be charging? I'm just wondering what lettings agents.
Yes, and we also deal with estate agents boards as well. That do
estate agent what? Sorry,
it's estate agents boards as well. We deal with as well to do with how they're advertised. Certain quantities they've got to comply with if they've got a board out. But the letting is to do with legal fees and people getting their deposits back.
Okay, great. I was going to ask about fireworks and if there was any work done around fireworks that might be covered within this that I might have missed.
Yes, we all premises are licensed by the council to sell fireworks, and every premises that was licensed was inspected between whenever they were allowed to do it legally, which I think is the 15th of October and the 7th or 8th of November. And again, places are only, unless they've got an all year round license, but no Plough and Hackney is an all year round license, they only have, and they're allowed to sell them again for New Year and the Chinese New Year as well.
Was there any test purchasing done, as in like for minors on as you've got with 4 point?
Not for fireworks.
Okay. Is that something that's ever done? Is that
we have done it in the past? Yes. Okay. It depends on the availability of police cadets who they're around to do lots of work for us.
Okay, great. And
because it coincided unfortunately with half term, so they would go off at that period.
Okay, great. And the last question I had was around table 14, where you've identified scam victims. I'm wondering if there's like an increase in scams and scam victims, and what kind of work is involved in identifying scam victims. Or, yes, some may suffer from feelings of shame for being scammed, unnecessary feelings of shame, because these scams can be quite sophisticated. And what additional support is made available, or signposting to other services when those victims are identified?
We work with the police. A lot of it is intelligence led, obviously, and also we work with the banks as well, because if, say, an elderly person, for example, goes to the bank and they take out a large amount of money, that's a red flag straight away, and then the bank should report that to the police to say that's a potential scam, just to check that it's not legal. And obviously, we work with adult safeguarding as well, that because I know last year we dealt with a victim who, before we found out, had given £10,000 to a builder, but we stopped him giving any more money. So it is mainly, most of the people are older, vulnerable, and it seems to happen in specific areas. I would say Stoke Newington, Stamford Hill seem to be particularly vulnerable to scams.
Have you noticed an increase? Is that increase?
There's always been scams, and there always will be scams. So we do what we can. We work with the police and that. And obviously, one of the things we do is officers went to the annual Winter Warmer event, which again sort of notifies which is for older people. It's mainly older people who were, and the other thing as well is they don't necessarily have, say, online banking, so they would physically go into the bank, which is why we work with the banks as well to make sure that there's any sort of large amount over sort of say £2,500 that they should pick that up. While there's no reason why somebody would necessarily be doing that. It should bring up a flag to the bank that there is an issue.
Yeah. And
obviously we work in partnership where we provide information to banks about this. We work a lot with the police as well and with our adult safeguarding and data team as well, and they send out warnings as well when there's sort of events happening, so residents know. And it is particular times of the year, and like if it's wet, it's to do with new roofs or guttering or something of that type of thing. Then cold weather, it's boilers or new windows.
Do you think that there'll be an increase when we get the data for Q3 and 4 then?
Probably no. It really depends on most of what after all that stuff we're doing, most of what we rely on intelligence as well, because we work with the police. So we may get information from trading standards nationwide to say that this sort of scam is happening in an area and to look out for it. And then we can put a message out in comms to say there's been an increase of this nationally, just beware.
Thanks.
Just to come back to the estate agents boards you were, referring to, have you got any comments on, because I know they are estate agent, the actual event that's been advertised is supposed to take up most of the board space.
It's and often, it is only a third.
And often it's the other way around.
If you have any concerns about specific estate agents, just let us know and we'll investigate them.
Great. The other thing I was just wanting to ask about, I think you highlighted on page 109, the table 6, the food hygiene rating scheme. You did highlight that the national picture in terms of the rating 5 is much better than the Hackney and London. I wondered whether you'd have any comments on this and any support that we can give.
Through the Hackney Business Network provides support to small businesses.
Yeah.
So we're doing that, and we can help. One of the things we've got is we've signed up to the Healthy Catering Commitment, and we've got an officer dealing with healthy catering, and she's trying to encourage smaller businesses to do healthy food. So there's all sorts of things we're looking at. So we've tried to get all sorts of ways to get involved, to engage with smaller businesses. One of the things we've done is Hackney is a pilot for waste reduction from food businesses throughout London. So we've done another 50 inspections of businesses that we would normally have done for that purpose. So it's a way of getting in the door to engage with businesses. And as you know, if you're a small business, food hygiene isn't going to be your top priority. The VAT man not paying tax are a top priority.
Yeah.
And then they see us at the door and they're not always very happy. But we do what we can to support small business, and we encourage everyone to join the Hackney Business Network.
Right. Thank you, Jared.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you asked a similar question to mine, but so I was just going to follow up on one specific point. That help that the council provides through the business network and any other forms of support, do you target that on, say, the businesses that are falling into the lower ratings to get them up and to
it would be for smaller businesses, which more often than not do have a lower rating.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And again, but the thing is, it's important that businesses, most of them will come to us because that's there. We need to be able to do deliveries to survive. So they will actually want to have that rating of 3 or above. And as you will see, we don't have any businesses with a rating of 0, and the numbers with a rating of 2, of 1 and 2 are actually very low.
Yeah.
They're not significant numbers, but again, we encourage them to improve. But as I said, a small business may not necessarily have good pest control records, evidence of training, or a food hygiene management system, which would help increase their rating to 3 or above. And we work with them to try and do that.
And is there any more? I know not in this
good as it is, but we work with the regeneration team as well to see if there are any issues with small businesses and how we can help them to, say, provide training or whatever to them, which we will do.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose the reason I'm drilling into it is that I've well, I don't know about others, but I'm making a series of assumptions about the types of businesses that might fall into the top rating there, the price point of those businesses perhaps, and the people, the customers that they would serve, and in turn making assumptions about those on the lower
Not
end.
necessarily. Very expensive restaurants can be very poor. So I would never make any assumption about any business.
Okay, and that's all right. So and you find that there doesn't tend to be a correlation. So it's not that the businesses with the worst food hygiene rating might be serving more so than others. Not entirely, not always the case. But is there a trend? It sounds like there isn't. Is that the case?
No, there isn't.
No. Okay. So just that isolated.
It happens, and people sort of fall on hard times, and food hygiene may not be their top priority. So the rating will go down, and then they'll get a visit from us, and we'll encourage them to go up.
Okay, members, any other questions? So this report was for information purposes only. So if we could note it.
Noted.
Noted.
Recommendations, and just to thank Jerry for providing the
Thanks
update.
for coming in on such a chilly night.
Yes, thank you.
I had other business to attend to.
Okay, members, so if we could go on to Jerry, of course, you're welcome to leave. And Councillor Donna Thomas, I don't think, she wanted to add anything, but thank you for attending the meeting, Councillor Thomas. Okay, moving on to item 7, we've got the draft work programme. So we turn to page
141.
141, thank you. We turn to page 141. Okay, so we've only got one more remaining meeting, I think, of this municipal year, and that's the March meeting. Any comments on the work programme? I wondered if, I know there was talk from Katie that possibly the next annual monitoring report may come through in the spring. So it might be worth just confirming with her whether she thinks it might be for the March meeting, or whether, because I noticed we're supposed to get, I know the aim is to get the monitoring in 12 a month, and that would take that time frame. Zoom, then it might be June. Be for June meeting. Okay, no more comment on the work programme.
Ask about the HR policy review. It says if required, both in December and in each of the months. I'm just wondering what does that.
So my understanding is that's if a particular issue crops up and it needs to be reviewed. So it's always a standing item on each agenda. Any other queries at all or comments? Okay. Any other business? I haven't been notified of anything. Okay, there being no further business, I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you for attending. To those online and those in the room, and season's greetings all.
And to you.